everyone. Let's check if the clicker works. Yep. OK, so again, hi, everyone. I'm the guy who tends to speak about Node.js on conferences. So this is going to be mostly about Node.js, but I always try to squeeze in something for the browser JavaScript people. You can find me online at Nauktur everywhere. If you type this into Google, everything that shows up is me because no one else has used this sequence of letters. And I'm going to tell you this and that about security, but from a developer point of view. So I'm not a hacker. This is not going to be a typical talk where a hacker comes up and tells you how they would attack you and maybe how you could defend. This is going to be about how a developer makes their application more secure with just a bit of care and attention and not a lot of hacking knowledge. I do have a bit of hacking knowledge, but I still don't consider myself a hacker. But I did when I was 14. When I was 14, these were the first 5 lines of JavaScript that I wrote. This would break Internet Explorer to the point where your Windows desktop wouldn't work. So now that I've shown you a hack that no longer works, this is a valid security presentation. So let's move on. Now to the point. We're going to talk about making it harder for the hacker to break your application. And this is called hardening. And you can harden your application with a lot of software good practices and a lot of implementation details. This is not about it. I'm going to talk about what I would call development hardening. So it's hardening, but in your day-to-day job. No hacking knowledge is required to understand this. I'm going to tell you a bit about new tools and practices you can introduce that give you the best results for the little effort you put into it. So one thing I need to mention, you're still responsible for your code. So, you know, input sanitization, I promise I'm not going to say that again, but it's important. It's still important, and I'm not overriding that. Anyway. So now to the Node.js chapter. First, also, something that has to be in a security presentation, don't use eval, it's evil. And there's tools to fix it. So if you accidentally use evil, because it's possible to do it accidentally, there's an ESLint plugin that shows you this and will stop you from continuing if you run it in CI. So that's one thing you can do. And this ESLint plugin has a bit of warnings also. So you will get that very interesting warning when you do something that could end up being an evil. So these 4 lines make console log pound run. And there's no evil word in there, but it still evaluates a string. So you get a warning, and every time you get that warning, it's worth checking maybe once. But yeah, it's a bit paranoid, this add-on. Anyway, it breaks your CI only with errors, not with warnings, so I can recommend it. Next, NPM modules have post-install scripts. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there's a post-install and pre-install, and each package can run them. And this is remote code execution on your server if you run npm install in production, so don't. You can always disable those scripts, but some of your packages might not compile when you disable that. So instead, make sure you don't run npm install in production, run it in your CI. If someone takes over a container in your CI, and install a backdoor in there, they won't access it from the web anyway, and you're destroying the container. So this is a short example of a GitLab CI config that installs your dependencies and then exports that as an artifact, which you can use in a later build step when you build a container or a package with your app to deploy somewhere. And since we're at this stage of your build, let's look at npm audit. Okay, raise your hands if this is the first time you hear about npm audit. Okay, it was worth coming here. When you run npm install, it audits your dependencies and gives you this line that says, hey, you have vulnerabilities in your dependencies. But there is a full npm audit command which gives you all the details and suggests fixes. And you don't have to read it because you can run npm audit fix and it will attempt to fix all your security issues in your dependencies by installing newer versions of stuff. Then you just have to check if your app is still working. Anyway, this is a great tool, and I'm really enthusiastic about it to the point that I used it at work even before it was ready. So before npm audit, there was a Node security platform, and it gave you a script called nsp check, which more or less did the same as npm audit. And we were running this in CI. So I'm working at Egnyte in an integrations team. We build code that tries to make two services work together. And we happen to have 25 Node.js applications in production as of recently, and growing. And there's a lot of maintenance on that because we upgrade our infrastructure, we upgrade the tooling, we move from Node 4 to 6 to 10, and there's plenty of work to do. So my workday, oops, no background. Okay, my workday looks a bit like, there's frustration because, oh boy, I have to update 25 things. Then automation, work, and then happiness. I can now easily update 25 things. So my editor of choice for a while was sed, which edits files with regular expressions. That was fun. But then I graduated into more serious problems, including maintenance of dependencies. So I want to run audit in CI. But if I check the audit in CI and there's an issue, it's going to make my build red, while it's not really that important because it was a developer dependency or it was a build step and it has a denial of service vulnerability. So what, right? I can prevent a denial of service in my own build tools. So I want to ignore some things, but I want to manage the decisions because I'm not alone. There's a team. And everyone on the team needs to be able to check who made the decision to ignore something, to go and ask, are you sure? Or to just go and ask for a reason. And then we want to know when this happened, and sometimes when a new vulnerability shows up and our CI turns red, we look into it and there's no fix yet. What now? Well, we should go in and fix it, but imagine it's the last day before the demo and we don't have time for it. So I would risk someone going in and ignoring the whole thing, setting it to be ignored, when it shouldn't really be ignored. We just want to postpone it a bit. So we need to remember about it. There needs to be a way to remember about it. And as I said, it's frustration, then automation, and then happiness. So what I did, I automated that. It's called npm audit resolver. It's a fairly new project. When you run the command, it runs npm audit and then builds on that. So it's going to tell you that a dependency needs your attention. And you have a few choices in there. And some of the choices I wanted to highlight is, you can say, remind me in 24 hours, or you can say ignore paths. Or you can just remove the dependency because you notice that you no longer need it. These are new concepts in managing your dependencies security. And remind me in 24 hours is something that I really like about it, because I can let anyone on the team choose to ignore a dependency without a lot of research when we just have to get it to run in staging. But before we go to production, our build safely turns red again in 24 hours on the next day. If it's a weekend, well, if it's a weekend, it can fail earlier. But if a build fails and no one's there to watch it, does it make a sound? You can ignore the dependency, but you will only ignore this single dependency. So if the same error happens elsewhere, it's going to show up again. And this is something NSP check couldn't do, and this is something npm audit doesn't do yet. And yet means I'm trying to get npm audit resolver merged into npm. The format of how it works might change, but there's an RFC, we're working on it. But you can use it already. I'm using it in my team. We have 25 different apps running this in CI and making decisions with the script. It works. You can use it, and you can give me some feedback. It's going to be useful for the process of introducing this into npm audit in the future. So hooray for npm's future and Node.js future, I hope. Okay, so now let's do it all together. We have NPX. If you don't know what NPX is, check it out. It's not the topic of my presentation, but it's really great. And this is a short example of what I would put in GitLab CI configuration. Any other CI configuration should look quite alike. So first I run the ESLint with the plugin. It needs some configuration in the repository as well, but you'll find it in the documentation. Then I run npm install -- production, which means I don't install unnecessary dependencies. And then I quickly run the check audit script from npm audit resolver, which runs npm audit and then goes in and checks which of the items were ignored, comparing with a file that I created in the repository when running the audit resolution. So you're tracking everything in a repository, and your CI is listening to all those ignores that you set there, and it can spot when something was fixed and is not anymore because of merge conflicts on package log.json. And then after your audit is done, your dependencies are safe. You extract node modules and you put it elsewhere. If you don't like the idea of using artifacts, or your build is just different, you can check my older projects, secure dependencies, which we used before we went into Kubernetes. And that thing is doing more or less the same, but then giving you a tar file with all your dependencies, with the versions of Node and your application, and you can upload it to a repository and then share it across your applications. Okay. These four things are really powerful. If you run that against your Node.js application, you're going to close a lot of gaps where someone could attack you, even though your code was really good. So now I want to do the same in the browser. So what's the best thing I can do to prevent a hacker from destroying my front-end application without fixing a lot of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, in case I didn't fix them? And that's content security policy. In case you didn't know, content security policy is widely supported. It's really a great tool, and I had a talk about it 4 years ago when it was already widely supported, except for Internet Explorer. And then I'm also linking from this presentation to a documentation bit on Mozilla Developer Network. And overall, if you didn't hear about it, it's just a header you add to your application. And it configures the browser, telling it which sources it can use for running code, which kinds of JavaScript invocations it can allow. And the biggest difficulty in introducing it to an existing project is that you don't really know what to allow and what to prevent from running. So instead of doing your best and spending a week figuring it out, reading through all the code base, Instead, you can get the report-only version of the CSP header, put your desired policy in there, and start tracking the logs from the browsers saying which things were blocked. You can run your full test suite on your application and see what pops up, then decide to fix it or decide to loosen the policy a little bit. Then you can go to production with your report-only header. So it's not going to stop anything and break anything and prevent any cross-site scripting attacks, but it's going to give you a lot of information about what is happening, and there's edge cases that only your users will ever test, right? You know, testing in production, who doesn't like it? So you get a good report. And again, you make the decisions. After all that, you can switch to content security policy without the report-only part, and you're done. What does it do? Well, if someone finds a cross-site scripting vulnerability and injects a script tag to your page, content security policy can say, hey, all my JavaScript is in files, so don't run any scripts that are inside of script tags. You're no longer vulnerable to the whole thing. So I hope I've inspired you to introduce it. One of my life goals is to make content security policy more widespread. Hopefully this worked. And if you need to know more, I'm sometimes doing workshops on this and other things, Node.js and JavaScript, not a lot of frameworks though. So check it out. And if you want to talk about Node.js and security and training and so on, I'm going to be outside after my talk, and then after the whole conference, I'm going to hang around the exit for a while. So you can come by, talk to me. Yeah, let's chat. Thank you.